Well, howdy, partner. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another great show for you today. It is Wednesday, I believe, and I'm again joined by my friend Marianne Williamson. Hello, Marianne.
Hey, Robbie. Well, hi to all of you. Today is more of the same in terms of all the stuff going on in this country. Hopefully, by watching the show today, you'll feel a little more clear about things. We'll try. Anyway, what's on your radar, Robbie?
Let's get right to it. Some big news yesterday from my friends at the Washington Free Beacon. How about this? The federal government finally confirmed 7 U.S. military service members contracted a disease with COVID-like symptoms while participating in the Wuhan military games in October of 2019. That's 2 months before the outbreak at the Wuhan seafood market, the wet market. Now, this report lends tremendous credence to the lab leak theory of COVID's origins, undercutting the idea of animal spillover from the wet market. It should go without saying, but if people were sick with COVID 2 months before the wet market outbreak, then the wet market is not the originator of the earliest COVID cases. Now, you're probably thinking, Wuhan military games? Huh? What was that? Well, in fact, from October 18th through October 27th, 2019, Wuhan, China played host to a kind of Olympic Games for military sports, and many nations, including the U.S., participated. In fact, American participants reported at the time Wuhan seemed like a ghost town. They wondered if, for some reason, the Chinese government had maybe ordered a soft lockdown without international awareness. Wonder what that was about. Now, additionally, 7 U.S. soldiers came down with, as I said, COVID-like symptoms. Now, that doesn't mean they had COVID, of course. COVID can be hard to differentiate from the flu or from having a cold, etc. And they were not tested for COVID since at that time, we're talking about, this is before the pandemic, there are no tests. This all comes, by the way, from a Biden administration government report that was not made public despite Congress passing a COVID disclosure law that President Biden signed ordering the release of precisely this sort of information. Now it has finally been obtained years later by the Washington Free Beacon. The report notes that the Wuhan military games were held in close proximity to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, where scientists were engaged in dangerous research on bats, and that research was funded by you, the U.S. taxpayers, with the full backing of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Richard Ebright is a scientist who favors the lab leak explanation for COVID's origin, saying it's very likely. He tells the Free Beacon it's an outrage that the Biden White House and the 118th Congress, Senate, and House Armed Services Committee did not publicly release this information when it became available in 2022, but instead withheld this information for the duration of their terms. Now, this should be taken as yet one more piece of evidence that when the mainstream media, expert scientists, and some Democratic politicians demonize the lab leak theory as a racist conspiracy theory, remember that? They were the ones promoting misinformation. The Energy Department, the FBI, the CIA, they all believe lab leak is the most likely cause of the pandemic. I don't know about you, but by now, I am outraged that information about COVID's potential origins is still being withheld from the American public and has been for years. Why was this report kept secret by the Biden administration? Why has the federal government not told us more about suspicions that bat scientists at the Wuhan lab were sick with COVID before the wet market outbreak took place? The Wall Street Journal has reported that. We would like to hear more about it. Who is being protected by all of this? Is it just knee-jerk secrecy? The American people deserve answers. Their elected representatives passed legislation to give them those answers. Biden agreed to provide those answers. Now Trump is president, so no excuses. The federal government needs to tell us everything, and I mean everything that is known about COVID's origins. With the potential for another pandemic, due perhaps to reckless research, the fate of the world may very well depend on these disclosures. So we have more information here, Marianne, coming from the government. There's a government report that was not released to the public, despite the clearest possible law being passed and signed by Biden saying we will disclose knowledge of COVID origins. We want to know. I want to know what was the cause of this horrific mass killing event that ruined the country, ruined the world for several years. Now we know that scientists participated in these military games at Wuhan,
Right.
and it's not service members, and they were sick.
Right.
Maybe it wasn't COVID. We don't know for sure.
Right.
We also have heard reporting from the Wall Street Journal, reported very credibly, that scientists, the very scientists who worked on the bats, got sick with
Yeah.
disease at about the same time. So That's all very highly suspicious, and we need to know more about it, because if it is the case that people had COVID before the wet market outbreak, then the wet market outbreak was just a super spreader event like a party at a mall or whatever, or a movie theater. It was not the cause of COVID if people already had COVID before that happened.
Well, on this one, I agree with you. And I never bought the wet market. It didn't feel right to me. It always felt to me. I think lab leak feels more correct, but I think there are bigger issues here as well. First of all, anyone that doesn't, and this has been going on for a while, but particularly around health issues, anyone who doesn't fit the official narrative about health in this country is called a conspiracy theorist.
You know this
and
from
that
personal
I
experience.
do know it, and that is the way to. First of all, it's the way to actually foster genuine conspiracy theories, because when people get to the point that they know, I think there's something we're not being told here, then they stop believing anything officialdom has to say. And it's very important that on some things, including health, that we do get the straight up information. So I agree with you on this one. And I think that there are secrets. You know, they say in AA that you're as sick as your secrets. And I think that's true of a country as well. I always felt that way about like the assassination of JFK, that the fact that we never, there's something when a secret is in the air, nobody knows the truth. That's why justice is so important, that truth is ultimately determined. And I think when it comes to COVID, this is going to be a kind of toxicity for Americans until this thing gets ultimately handled. So I agree with you on this one, and good for you for keeping the story alive.
Thank you. And the other thing is, because so many of the people at the top level, you know, in the U.S. government as well, this is research that was funded by taxpayers at the direction of our own government. So it's funny when it came from a wet market was the established explanation, and that it came from a lab was like the racist conspiracy. I'm like, which is the most racially, this theory, the lab leak, we're on the hook for that too because we funded it. Whereas the dominant theory has to do with very specific Chinese cultural cuisine practices. That would be a more racially problematic explanation. Doesn't make sense.
I think it's important for everybody to know that the story goes that Obama asked the question, which he should have, if we do this kind of experimentation, could the virus leak? He was told no, and he said, shut it down.
Yes.
Then the question becomes, and this is where whether it was Fauci or I don't know, you seem to have strong opinions, I don't know, but someone went around him. If in fact it was a lab leak, then someone went around the directive of the president who had said to shut it down. And also, I think there's a bigger question, where are we as a human race that we are even doing this? And then you have, well, who would be doing it against each other? Well, probably countries like China or the United States. But then we are working together in developing these things. It is so macabre. It shows something so immoral and sick about the human race that we're even doing this gain of function and they say, well, we're trying to do it so that if it happens, but actually you are creating the conditions which actually increase the probability that it would happen.
Yes. And I keep saying this, our viewers have heard me say this a million times. If this research absolutely has to be done because it's vital for some medical reason, can it be done like in some uber safe facility in Antarctica where there's no human population nearby, or like on the moon or something, rather than in a unsafe, lab that is, assembled with faulty like walls and things? The complaints about the actual conditions in the lab were that there were not sterile surfaces, that people were just coming and going, not even wearing basic masks, and then it's in a city with a massive civilian population surrounding it. That just seems insane that you would do this research under those conditions.
The problem is there was a time when I would say, well, we should have congressional hearings about this. But even congressional hearings have become somewhat of a joke.
Yeah.
That's what's so wrong right now. Nobody knows where to look for solid righteousness. And
I don't want more hearings where it's just the same people being asked the same questions. I want disclosure of documents that the government has. So the government had this document for years. They were supposed to show us this document, and they just didn't. So there are more documents. So whatever the intelligence that led the Energy Department, the FBI, and the CIA to make their conclusions, I don't want just a summary of their conclusions. That's fine. I want to know, what did they literally base it on? For instance, the Energy Department has a lot of knowledge of how scientific laboratories in the U.S. are managed. So the fact that they made this determination is very telling, because they know a lot about laboratory conditions. So I want to know exactly, walk me through how you reached this decision, and I think that would be very illustrating.
It would be very important, but also, everything leads to something else that's a problem in America today. When I was young, if you saw on television breaking news, it's like everybody come into the living room and turn on the TV. It's breaking news. Today, Justin Bieber gets a, DUI and it's breaking news. Everything's
poor
breaking
Justin
news.
Bieber.
So the way the media
Justin
works
Bieber.
today, there's no sense of proportion. It would, even if everything you just said happened, it would just be one more thing on the news and people would continue to cut the carrots.
Well.
Okay, we got to fix all that, everybody, and the only way it can happen is if each of us, I think, takes responsibility for a more intelligent analysis.
I'm a believer. Up next, more good news for the Trump administration. The Supreme Court has allowed the mass firing of probationary federal workers. We will discuss more Rising right after this.